This episode is brought to you by the Regional Air Quality Council. This summer, go wild for Front Range air quality and leave the car at home and walk, bike, or scoot shorter distances to reduce ground level ozone. Remember, to reduce that ground level ozone, you have to turn your car off and definitely don't idle with the AC on. Created from pollutants like car exhaust, ozone is the Front Range's biggest air quality issue and the leading cause of respiratory problems. Know when it matters most to take these simple steps for better air. Sign up for summer ozone text alerts by sending Better Air CO to 21000 or visit simplestepsbetterair.org. That's simplestepsbetterair.org. Today on CityCast Denver, Boebert won. Epson Hernandez lost. But like every primary election, yesterday's was a battle for something bigger, the future of our two major political parties. So me and producer Paul Karolyi are digging into the results of all the local and state races that mattered with an eye on the bigger battles to come in November. Today is Wednesday, June 26th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Good evening, Paul. Actually, this is morning for most people. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Bree. Good morning.
Good morning. Primaries last night. Some big stuff. We've been watching
Lots
very
of
closely.
Votes.
I mean, lots of votes?
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah, I guess it was a pretty low turnout, is what people were saying. But,
Yeah.
you know, it's an off year. Well, no, it's not an off year. It's a presidential
It's a primary,
election year.
though.
But it's a primary. You know, there's no huge races. There's no like Senate seats up for grabs. We're not voting for, it's not a presidential primary.
No, and it's primaries are parties against themselves, essentially. So it just feels different. It's different. But
although it is still an election, and I love an election day. It always sneaks up on me, but it's always an opportunity to learn something new about the city. Because that's what these votes are to me.
Well, what should we talk about first? We should get to some of the results. We're going to cover Denver for sure and a couple of the state races, but
let's start with Denver.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about district attorney.
Go ahead. You talked to both the candidates, John Walsh and Leora Joseph. What happened?
Yeah, so Walsh, former U.S. attorney. Leora Joseph was head of the state's behavioral health agency and a former prosecutor. Walsh just took this thing. The thing I honestly found most interesting was digging into his endorsements, like post, just looking at this as we were gathering information. He was backed by the DA he's replacing.
So it seems like Denverites are saying we want more of the same. That's
kind of what I thought, even though he attempted during his campaign to differentiate himself and say he was going to be harder on some issues, I think. I don't know. It was a strange endorsement to me. But also he got Senator Bennett, Senator Hickenlooper, former mayors Wellington Webb and Pena. I mean, he just had a lot. Eric Holder, former U.S. AG. He had some really big names up there. And I think, that's not the only thing, but we're looking, we look at endorsements, we look at money, we look at as well as like potential policy. But these are two people that had not been in an election before. So we were just learning about them. And John did, he did really, really well. So,
all right, let's move on to some of the state house races. There was a couple of really interesting ones.
Yes.
Very closely watched in the context of this broader conversation about the more centrist wing of the Democratic Party and the more progressive wing. So we're going to talk about two races. One is House District 6, which is the Capitol Hill area. And this was Elizabeth Epps, who is the incumbent, running against Sean Camacho, the challenger.
Yeah. So
Bree.
Again, parts of Central and East Denver, Cap Hill, Congress Park, Montclair, Lowry. Elizabeth was the incumbent. And what was interesting to me in this race was her challenger, Sean Camacho, was a former Republican.
Oh, I didn't know that about him.
And I think he switched parties about 5 years ago. Again, talking about big endorsements. Also, I guess we should just cut to the chase. Camacho, as of 10 p.m. last night, was at 64%.
Just crushing her.
Yes, to Elizabeth's 35%. But again, he was endorsed by Governor Polis, which I found interesting.
Polis does not normally do that.
That's what I thought. Attorney General Phil Weiser also endorsed him. This was part of the dark money conversation, I would say, on the Dem side. So the Denver Post did a great deep dive into some of the money going into these primary races. And Kent Thiry, can you give a little too long?
Multimillionaire founder of the dialysis giant DaVita, who's no longer with that company, but has backed and successfully run a few ballot measures in the last 5-6 years that have reformed the way our elections work. And he's got a couple more that he's working on this year.
Well, his group, Let Colorado Vote Action Group, poured more than $1 million into Democratic primaries across the state. And Camacho was one of those that got support from Kent Thiry. So again, we're talking money, we're talking endorsements, but we're also talking an incumbent against a challenger who was a former Republican.
Yeah, so Camacho, I guess, is the more like centrist side of things, and Epps is, Epps we know is one of the co-sponsors of the assault weapons ban, very outspoken on in solidarity with Gaza over the last 6 months. She also made a lot of enemies at the Capitol.
Yeah, so this was definitely, this race probably embodied that issue the most, the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party versus the more centrist, moderate, I guess less progressive. I don't know what you want to call it, but it doesn't sound like that part of the city, at least, was on board with that.
Which is fascinating after only 2 years, since they very much chose her over someone else, Katie March, who was more of that centrist Democrat.
Yeah.
But I think that's the that's the tenor in the country right now. Very similar race with Jamal Bowman in New York City, just got absolutely smoked by a more centrist Democrat in his primary. So I don't know. Maybe this is the direction of the Democratic Party right now. There's a little bit more interest in more moderate ideas.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We also saw that here in House District 4.
Let's talk about it. This is Tim Hernandez versus Cecilia Espinoza.
Yeah, so Cecilia came in at 54. This is as of 10 p.m. again last night. We're still watching this race, but Cecilia came in at 54% to Tim's 45%. Again, this is the district we are reporting live from right now. This is the west and north sides of Denver, basically from the Regis neighborhood all the way over to Westwood. Tim Hernandez was known as a former teacher who ran for office. Cecilia and Tim went up against each other to fill the vacancy.
Yes, because that's how he got into this seat in the first place.
Yes.
Last year.
Yeah. So when Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez stepped down to take on her at-large city council seat, which she was elected to, Tim and Cecilia went head-to-head in this special vote.
There was like a small group of Democratic Party insiders. I think it was about 70 people who actually voted for Tim and got him this seat. So he finished the term, and now they're running for a whole term.
Okay. Yeah. So they had gone up against each other, I guess, in some sense. But this was a little bit different because they were actually appealing to Denver voters.
Yep. Actual voters knocking on doors. So
I think for what I would take from it a little bit too is I think Tim was introducing himself for the first time to some people. So again, this was that Tim is the more progressive, and Cecilia, former appellate court judge, is representing more of this moderate centrist side of the Democratic Party. And her campaign also saw support from the Kent Thiry money as well. Interesting. I think those two races, we'll probably be talking a lot more about that as we see more of these results come in, and as we start getting closer to November, this whole like moderate progressive divide. But let's keep going. There's a lot of races to talk about here. There's some big state races that we want to talk about, but there's one more Denver race, and it's for the congressional seat. Now, it's not there's not competitive races here, because Diana DeGette, yet again, running unopposed, and she cruised to victory here. But Bree, what are you seeing in these results here in the Democratic primary and the Republican primary for Congressional District 1? Yeah, again, like you said, Diana cruised in over 64,000 votes for her, and unopposed as a Democrat. I think, to me, just speaks to her popularity as well. But she's a 14-term legislator, known for her work in reproductive health care, environmental issues, LGBTQ rights. She's very well known in the Democratic Party. And but there was the interesting part of this race, like you're pointing out, was not the the primary necessarily of like Dems versus Dems. This is just looking at the GOP challenger, or who will be the challenger here, which is Valdemar Archuleta. We had him on the show. He got some press attention in the last couple of weeks because of this issue with the GOP, the chair of the Colorado GOP, Dave Williams, and the email he sent out, the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric. And Valdemar really stood up against that. And he came in as of 10 p.m. He has almost 10,000 votes, which again says something. I mean, it says Republicans are engaged to a certain extent, even though he's looking at a challenger like Diana DeGette.
Yeah. I mean, that'll be an interesting race in November when those two go up against each other. I don't know if Valdemar is going to be able to hold on to any of this momentum.
Yeah.
I mean, in 10,000 votes, there are Republicans in Denver, although maybe you don't hear from them very often. The last two races that Republicans ran, there was similar situations, unopposed. Shane Bowling and Jennifer Gualtieri, and they got 18,000 and 19,000 votes each.
So almost double what he has done.
Yeah.
So maybe it really is more of a blip.
Maybe.
We'll see.
I don't know.
We'll see.
Let's take a quick break and come back and talk about state races.
This episode is brought to you by the Coldwell Banker Denver Century Ride. Cycle the city this year with the Coldwell Banker Denver Century Ride in partnership with CityCast Denver. For 13 years, this event has been Denver's ultimate urban cycling tour. You can discover the Metro's most bikeable streets, trails, lanes, and parks. The Century Ride is on Saturday, September 28th, and starts and finishes at the shops at Northfield. Participants can choose to ride 25, 50, 85, or 100-mile courses. The courses will be supported with aid stations, police details, and bike mechanics the whole way. This ride benefits Bicycle Colorado, the state's leading cycling advocacy organization. For more information, check out denvercenturyride.com. Now through July 15th, get 10% off your registration. Again, that's denvercenturyride.com. This episode is brought to you by Denver Health. Heading to Winter Park this summer? Don't forget, Denver Health's Winter Park Medical Center is right there for you at the base of the resort. Whether it's a routine checkup, a pulled muscle from hiking, or even altitude sickness, Denver Health is here for you. Denver Health offers primary care, urgent care, sports medicine, emergency services, and so much more. The Winter Park Medical Center serves the community with men's and women's wellness visits, pediatric care, prenatal care, sick visits, and radiology services. The location is optimal for connecting with visitors and locals all around the Grand County area. From wellness exams and immunizations to managing chronic illness, Denver Health has you covered. Denver Health's Winter Park Medical Center is open all year long to ensure you're always taken care of. For more information, visit denverhealth.org/winterpark. That's denverhealth.org/winterpark.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast, or, as I can say now, thanks to a few weeks with Babbel, hola, soy David Plotz, el jefe de CityCast. What if in 2024 you got a little bit better every day? When you're learning a new language with Babbel, that's exactly what you're doing. And if Babbel can help me start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, imagine what you could do in a full year. I got started with Babbel because I realized that my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, and my son, who's in AP Spanish, were conspiring against me, or I thought they were conspiring against me in Spanish. I wanted to know what they were talking about. And now, thanks to literally just a few weeks of Babbel, I'm starting to be able to eavesdrop. It is rare that something so fun and simple, and Babbel is super fun and very simple, is also so useful. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Okay, we're back. I mean, we got to talk about the biggest state race that Paul, you and I have spent an ungodly amount of time thinking about over the last 6 months of our lives. We're talking about Congressional District 4, CD4, Boebert versus everyone else.
Boebert versus the field. Well, she switched districts. She is currently representing Congressional District 3 in Congress, and everyone knows she switched districts back in December. She's running for this new district on the Eastern Plains, formerly a seat held by Ken Buck, and we thought it was a strategic move. We thought she was trying to just hold on to power, and dagnabbit, she did it. She pulled it off.
I mean, I remember you talking about the recent poll that she was doing what she just did in this primary, and it was apparent.
Yep, she's crushing these other five. It was Deb Flora, Richard Holtorf, Jerry Sonnenberg, Peter Yu, and Mike Lynch, and none of them ever managed to consolidate any support. I was reading some reporters on Twitter chatting about this. I think it was Jesse Paul saying that apparently those other folks did at some point talk about maybe a few of them dropping out to try to have like one person who could beat her, but I guess they just didn't agree on enough, and no one wanted to drop out just to beat Boebert. You got to remember, this is a Republican race in a very Republican district. None of their views are that different from each other. She just happens to have a very distinctive style, and she just crushed them. Crushed them.
I mean, yeah, we're talking about she got 40%?
43% of the vote as of 10 p.m. AP called this race at like 7:20, right after the first results.
So break the rest of that up and spread it across, 5 people.
I mean, if you add up all of the other people's votes together and had all of those votes gone to one person, yes, that one hypothetical person would have beaten Lauren Boebert.
That still feels like a tough...
But that's a huge if, and we will never know because it didn't happen, and she was going to win this primary, and she's probably going to go into November and win that election too.
Well, let's talk about that. What did the Democratic primary look like for this?
Well, this is going to be interesting because, again, another big part of Boebert's backstory is the fact that she got so unpopular in her district, and she was such a divisive figure in Washington that all over the country, people started donating money to the Democrat who ran against her, Adam Frisch, who, again, we'll talk about in a minute, but he didn't have an opponent, and he won the Democratic nomination for CD3 in what's going to be a very interesting election in November. But here, the Democrats who might get a similar advantage going up against Boebert, it was a super tight race between John Pedora, Ike McCorkle, Trish Calvarese. Calvarese was the Democrat who the party selected to run in the special election. Now, she did lose. She's not going to finish Ken Buck's term. It's going to be Greg Lopez. But Calvarese, she's winning here. She's got about 45% of the vote. Ike McCorkle was close. He ran twice before, lost to Ken Buck twice. He's a vet. But Calvarese, interesting new face in politics and this district. She's a former Bernie Sanders intern, speechwriter. She at one point worked for the AFL-CIO. The one policy difference I found that between her and her opponents in this primary was that she seems to be a little bit more moderate on guns. The Colorado Sun reported that she does not support a ban on semi-automatic weapons.
So interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being more appealing in this district. This is a gun-loving district, but I don't know. We'll see. That's going to be a really interesting one. I would really like to talk to her about how she's going to try to take on Boebert. I mean, in this super, super heavily conservative district. But I do think Boebert will probably win in November.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, just what we're seeing, but it doesn't mean it's a set in stone. We'll see.
No.
Do we want to talk about it all about Greg Lopez, or he's just
I don't think so.
He's the interim.
He's going to finish. He's going to finish this seat. He's probably not going to make many big waves.
Yeah.
He's a former Parker mayor. He was a Democrat at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was a Democrat when he was the mayor of Parker in his 20s.
Interesting. Oh, well, we all do different things in our 20s, don't we?
I guess so.
I smoked menthol cigarettes, so there you go. Well, let's talk about this next Congressional District 5. I mean...
Another big one.
This is so spicy.
Yes.
We're talking just who we got.
Okay, so the Republicans in this one were Jeff Crank, who was a longtime radio host, and probably more famously the Colorado director of Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers political advocacy group. So he's definitely more of like a never Trumper type Republican. That's what the Koch brothers are all about. And then Dave Williams, or shall I say Dave Let's Go Brandon Williams, as he filed a lawsuit.
He's really on the other side of that.
To be called at one point. Yeah, very much on the other side. He loves Trump, although he did siphon some fundraising money away from the Trump campaign. Remember our friend of the show, Kyle Clark from 9 News was telling us about that. There was some controversy where Williams was maybe not giving the proper tribute to the mothership, the Trump campaign. But anyway.
I mean, on top of other things like endorsing himself.
The list goes on with Williams. Ever since
the email, of course.
Yeah, the email nod to the Westboro Baptist Church.
Transphobic emails, yes.
Yeah, but he and I mean he's the chair of the state GOP.
We will see if that is the case.
And that was the big storyline here. Like, this is his whole strategy. He picked a bunch of people to run. He picked up a lot of endorsements. He endorsed Boebert, of course. So is his more Trumpy strategy going to work for the GOP? It didn't even work for him in this race. He lost by a mile to Crank.
He got, speaking of getting smoked.
In Congressional District 5, this is the area around Colorado Springs. So this is the same Colorado Springs that elected an independent Yemi Mobolade for mayor last year. And the Republicans down there not interested in Mr. Williams and his
the Trump stuff.
Trumpy antics.
That's so interesting up against the Boebert race.
I know. Boebert is the only one of these people on this very Trumpy side that came out of this. Like, I don't know where. I mean, the GOP was already in tatters, but where do they go from here?
I don't know. It's kind of sounding like a little bit like Colorado's just moving towards the center, regardless of which direction you're coming from. Maybe a little bit.
Perhaps.
I don't know.
Perhaps, with the exception of Boebert.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I'm just so curious what Dave Williams' next step is. I guess go work for the Westboro Baptist Church.
Gosh, who knows? I never understood that guy.
He digging his heels into the weirdest wrong things. Anyway, okay, let's look at another congressional district. We're looking at Congressional District 3. Again, this is Republican conversation. What's going on there?
Okay, so CD3 is currently the seat held by Lauren Boebert. This is western Colorado and southern Colorado, from Pueblo all the way to Grand Junction. On the Democratic side, like I mentioned, Adam Frisch, he was unopposed. He's going to win that nomination and go up against Jeff Hurd. There was a pretty wide field of Republicans in this primary. I think the only other major challenger was Ron Hanks, who got the endorsement from Dave Williams and the state GOP. But he, not successful. He only got about 28% of the vote in this primary. Hurd, on the other hand, much more on the never Trumpy side of things. I don't know if he would say he's a never Trumper, but he's
leans that way.
He's a Grand Junction based attorney. He got lots of endorsements from county commissioners. The last GOP governor of Colorado, Bill Owens, endorsed him. And he's going to go up against Frisch in November, which will be really interesting because what Frisch did against Boebert was he ran to the center and he collected a lot of these more centrist Republicans to back him instead in a traditionally conservative district.
Was it Frisch ran a weird commercial supporting or not? There was something, I can't even explain it, but it was promoting one of these guys that it seemed like pick the nuttier one. I can go up against that guy.
Yeah, he was playing a little bit of 3D chess on this one, but he seemed to be boosting Ron Hanks, the more extreme candidate, because
so he could go up against
he
the
would
more
imagine
extreme
exactly he could run a similar campaign against Hanks that he did against Boebert that was so successful. But he's not going to get that opportunity. He's going to have to run against a much more centrist, much more reasonable sounding Republican like Jeff Hurd.
Well, that'll be an interesting one to watch once we get to the
absolutely
the elections in November.
Maybe not as much as our next and final congressional district.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Congressional District 8.
Yeah, so this is the district that spans from the North Denver suburbs all the way up to northern Colorado. This was a district created. This is the newest district, and it was specifically created by our nonpartisan redistricting committee to be even, to be very balanced and to be very competitive. And in the first time it was up for grabs, there was the Democrat who won, Yadira Caraveo, who currently represents this district. So she is going to go on into November. On the Republican side, we had two candidates. We had Janak Joshi, who is a former doctor who left the profession in,
but you said was still wearing
suspicious circumstances.
Still wearing his white doctor's lab coat in his ads and stuff.
Yeah, and super conservative guy on immigration, on democracy. His opponent, Gabe Evans, also very conservative, but as our friends at Colorado Public Radio said, just seemed to have a lot more nuance in his positions, a lot more thought to it. And Evans curiously got the endorsement of both Trump and Americans for Prosperity.
So he got the endorsement of both sides of this GOP ideological struggle that's happening right now.
So maybe,
which is a wild.
hey, if we're looking for the future of the state GOP, maybe it's Gabe Evans. Maybe we need to take a little closer look at this guy because somehow he pulled it off.
That is so interesting.
Yep. And he crushed Janik Joshi. It was like huge margin of victory. So it's going to be Evans versus Caraveo in November in what will be probably the most competitive and most interesting race of the state.
Well, I have to say, this primary got me a little bit more excited for these local races that we're going to see in November.
I couldn't agree more.
Feels a little spicier. There's more at stake. I mean, I don't know. We're just looking at some interesting information telegraphed through the voters about how they feel about where both of these parties are going.
And listeners, I'd love to know how you feel about these results. Let us know, because we're going to be talking about this probably more on Friday, definitely more over the next few weeks. Call, text, leave us a voicemail, 720-500-5418. Again, that's 720-500-5418.
Oh, and right before we're about to sign off, it looks like Associated Press has called the race for House District 4. Tim Hernandez has lost to Cecilia Espinoza. Interesting stuff all around. Well, Paul, we'll be continuing to watch, and I don't know, some interesting stuff happening in November based on what we just saw this week. Thanks, Paul.
See you, Bree.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell Trisha Calvarese about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. I'm new here. Thank you so much. I wasn't sure. I haven't done this before.